A war has officially begun, ladies and gentlemen, between two camps, the Tradcons and the Red Pillars. If you're not familiar, the Tradcons are represented by folks like Matt Walsh, Jordan Peterson, Candace Owens. They generally advocate for being very religious, typically Christian conservative. They advocate for things like marriage, anti-abortion. They're very pro all that stuff. In the other corner, we got the Red Pillars. So that's folks like Better Bachelor, It's Complicated channel, Fresh and Fit guys in there, all these kind of popular guys on YouTube right now. And they advocate for men avoiding marriage, not signing the contract, and being very, very defensive in terms of how they deal with women so that they don't end up getting, turned around and bent over by the family law courts and in a situation they don't want to be in. We all know marriage life, relationships are kind of in the toilet right now. And so you have these two camps that have sometimes similar views on things, but there are fundamental key issues that they don't agree on. One such issue that started this war is the topic of marriage. The Tradcons have always been very pro-marriage, and it's very essential to them as far as their religion is concerned and their core values. The Red Pillars don't necessarily disagree with family or even marriage for that matter, but they're basically saying that the laws are stacked against men and that if you want to live a more happy life, you definitely don't want to get wrapped up in that because it can lead to a lot of heartache and pain and disaster. And not only that, but statistically, it's very likely to happen to you if you're a young man. So that's the issue, and that's what they're fighting over. The spoils of this war is going to be the support of young men who can fall into either camp, whether that be the Tradcons, who are typically looking for votes and all these kinds of things, or the Red Pillars, who are presenting an alternate point of view that's very appealing to young men right now, especially as young men become more frustrated with dating, marriage, and all these kinds of things, especially since we've seen the growth of feminism and its impacts on culture. So this all started from a tweet that Matt Walsh posted 2 days ago. We're going to run through that tweet, and then we're going to look at some responses to that tweet and how things are developing. All right, so Matt Walsh put out this tweet 2 days ago. Let's read it. The push by some ostensibly on the right to convince men to abandon marriage and family life is not only foolish and wrong-headed, but deeply insidious. These are bad actors intentionally leading men deeper into hopelessness. Many of these people are single and childless and know nothing about family life. In fact, it's clear that they are driven mainly by resentment and loneliness. They call this bitterness red pill, or whatever, but it's much simpler than that. They're envious, starved for attention, and have despaired of ever finding companionship in life. Rather than fix themselves, they try to spread their misery around. So that is a very shots fired first paragraph right there. I mean, he's basically called these folks traitors by saying they're ostensibly on the right. And then he's basically saying that all red pill people are just bitter, lonely, resentful, and that they're single and childless. That's not exactly true, because anyone who's been following the red pill knows that, especially in its inception, the folks who found the red pill were generally guys who went through divorces. Like, they were married. Like, these people weren't lonely. They were not unattractive. They are fathers. One of the biggest things that leads people to the red pill is going through the family law courts, losing the custody battles, being drained of everything financially, parental alienation, all these kind of nightmarish things for men. Even though Matt Walsh might say things that might agree sometimes with the red pill, this opening sort of salvo here has clearly drawn a line between Tradcon and red pill. So now this needs to be answered to, but let's finish the tweet. But whatever your motivations, if you are coming out against the family, against marriage, then you are agreeing with the left on the most fundamental and consequential of all issues. They want to tear down the institution for their reasons, you for yours, but you both are enemies of the most essential building block of civilization. I see no meaningful distinction between you. You're all a part of the same zombie horde trying to tear to pieces a thing that you don't understand. He's trying to come out here in defense of marriage. You know, it's all very brownie points with the Christian conservative, which is, you know, primarily his audience. So what he's trying to do is paint this attack on marriage, and that red pillars and feminists are actually much of the same. But he misses this here, you know, in terms of mischaracterizing who red pillars really are. Red pillars don't disagree with the concept of marriage. In fact, many times they believe that men and women do have very specific roles, which are dictated by, you know, evolution in the beginning of civilization all the way down to now. What Matt Walsh misses out on is it was not the red pillars who destroyed marriage. It was the law reforms that we had that essentially neutered marriage. You know, we had no fault divorce first passed in 1969 in Sacramento, and then it spread across the rest of the country in the following years. Before that, marriage was completely different. You know, he's selling this idea of marriage as if it is the same as what it was, you know, 60, 50, 70, whatever years ago, and he's missing the complete point. So he's trying to equate red pillars and feminism, but it sounds like he just doesn't know anything about the red pill. If you remember the early days of the red pill, back on the Reddit forum, back in, you know, 2013, 2014, it's very clear, you know, there was two ways, generally. There was the red pill and there was the blue pill. People who bought into the blue pill were folks who kind of believed in this sort of fairy tale of being the hero, being the prince that saves the damsel in distress. You're the protector and the provider. You get married, you live happily ever after, which is essentially what the tradcons are selling, right? The tradcons are the blue pill, okay? Then the red pillars came out and they're like, hey, look what's happening to us. Look at what's going on with marriage, child support, spousal support, all these things. I mean, we hear these nightmare stories all the time. We have so many testimonials for men who have gone through this, and they're like, we don't know what to do. They're trying to figure it out. So the red pill was first about trying to see the situation for what it was and getting your head out of the sand in that regard. If anything, the tradcons are more like the feminists than the red pills are like the feminists, because the tradcons encourage men to keep going into the marriage meat grinder, to keep playing into the hands of feminists so that they can be exploited by the laws and by the institutions. The tradcons are closer to the feminists than the red pillars ever were, ever will be. There's no question that marriage presents certain risks and potential hazards to both men and women alike. The only time a marriage can present hazards to women is if women are the breadwinners. Let's say you marry a nice pharmacist. You know, they make, I don't know how much money they make. Let's say they make $250,000, $300,000 a year, and you're just some regular guy working a job. You make $65,000 a year. All right, you guys are married for 10 years and you get divorced. Financially, the guy is going to be there. But what we know on the ground, what red pillars know, is that typically women do not want to be the breadwinners. They do not want to be the providers of a family unit. They have no problem getting jobs and making money for themselves, but deep down, they don't want to, you know, have a stay-at-home dad who takes care of the kids and they pay all the bills and provide everything. So statistically, what you see is men being on the other side of these quote-unquote potential hazards and certain risks that Matt Walsh mentions in his tweet. Even if the laws specifically don't mention gender, at least not financially, paternity is a different story. That is oppressive to men. Then men typically end up getting the shorter end of the stick here. But he glosses over that, and he does that on purpose. Let's finish this sentence. It's true that family courts are stacked against men. It's true that divorces happen too often and they are ugly and terrible. But the answer is not to abandon the family, thereby abandoning civilization itself. So he admits that the red pillars are right about all this stuff. But then he says the answer is not to abandon the family. You know, but then he doesn't mention any other solution. That's not a solution. That's simply surrender. If you want to be a coward and send you the white flag in your own life, that's fine. Trying to recruit others into your cowardice is the worst evil. Now, I'm just going to say this now. The real issue here has to do with two fundamentally different point of views. You can get married through the state, where you get the marriage certificate, okay? Or You can have a long-term relationship with someone outside of the confines of the state marriage, and you can have kids and have a house. But if a divorce happens, it's way less costly than if you sign the state paperwork. The real problem has to do with the way marriage is conducted in this country and by who Matt Walsh, Candace Owens, Jordan Peterson, who these folks really are. What they are they're primarily Christians. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with, their beliefs or anything like that. But when it comes to marriage in this country, they're shackled by something. No church is going to officiate a marriage ceremony without requiring the participants to sign the state license. Let's take a look at this. I Googled to try to find out, are there churches that will officiate a marriage ceremony without signing the paperwork? And it says, basically, no credible church will join you and your partner without a marriage license. Without a marriage license, your wedding ceremony has no legal backing. Okay, so if that's the case, a guy like Matt Walsh can't advocate for doing all the performative acts of a marriage, even it being spiritually bound, if you can find a church that would wed you guys in the eyes of God, because then your relations would not be in sin. However, Christians don't really have that option, because in order to get the spiritual ceremony, you also need to sign the state paperwork. So this presents a real threat to the tradcons, because if you have red pillars out here saying, hey, don't sign the paperwork, see chicks if you want, whatever, have a long-term relationship, whatever, but don't sign the marriage certificate, that is going to be fundamentally opposed to what the tradcons want. So to follow up from that, we had Better Bachelor, who is, he's a mgtow guy. He's pretty much, you can call him in the red pill camp. He makes a video today, this is just 3 hours ago, and it says, everyone attacks the men that need the most love and support. Why is that? And he specifically cites this tweet that we just read from Matt Walsh and criticizes it and explains his point of view. He explains that he's been married twice. I mean, he's tried to do that route, and it's worked out for Matt, but it's not worked out for him. It's not worked out for many, 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 many other men. Better Bachelor, or Joker, the host of the channel, basically comes out from the red pill corner and gives a response, a scathing response to Matt Walsh's tweet. And so this firmly cements red pill over here and tradcons over here. Now, less than 1 hour ago, we get Matt Walsh right here, 1 hour ago, releases this video. The red pill view on marriage is just as toxic as feminism. So not 2 hours later, we now have this. So we have a clear line drawn in the sand between the two camps. Prior to this, we're seeing some red pillars who are like, more men going their own way. We see other red pillars who do advocate for marriage, traditional values. However, they don't want to get married here. They're becoming the passport bros. But now they can probably be taken for more conservative, for more folks on the right. However, we now see the tradcons doing what they do best, having a holier than thou attitude, basically telling the red pillars to get in line, come back to the blue pill conditioning, step back into the matrix, and do what we tell you to do. We're the boss. We don't like you guys getting bigger, and you guys are going to come back to us. That's what Matt Walsh does. Basically, you guys are not pure. You guys are the sinful black sheep, and we do not like this. So now we have a line drawn in the sand, and this is going to mark a new phase in the development in our political culture between these two factions.
I've spent a lot of time in my career defending the institution of marriage, and I defend it because it's the bedrock of civilization, so it deserves defending, and I defend it because it's under constant attack, so it needs defending. And one of the most troubling developments in recent years, which we've discussed on this show in the past, is that these attacks are increasingly waged not just from the left, but from certain noisy segments of the right as well. Some right-wing influencers with legions of young, mostly male fans have decided that men should abandon marriage and family life and go their own way. And these influencers, many of whom consider themselves a part of the so-called red pill movement, pretend to despise feminists and yet have essentially arrived at the same conclusion as feminists, which is that we should give up on the family.
This is, a mischaracterization here. He's putting the cart before the horse. Red pillars didn't just wake up one day and were like, marriage is bad. This was a mistake. We should have never did that. Red pillars are essentially crafting a response to the rise of feminism in our society and the impacts it's had. Essentially what we're seeing is women who have a new way of thinking. They have abandoned their traditional roles, which they've held in society since, I guess, the beginning, maybe, depending on where you were. Okay? And the red pillars are saying, hey, they're not holding up their end of the bargain. We now have to figure out what we're going to do in response to this. And hoping for the best by continuing to get married and playing by the rules of the system as the law has crafted it has not been working. And you have more and more and more men creating this collective movement, trying to figure out what to do, sharing their experiences. And since about 2013, 2014, they're becoming smarter. Unfortunately, it's leading to a degradation of the other side's traditional roles, because men can't continue to be traditional if women aren't being traditional. So now we have Matt Walsh over here saying that the red pillars are the problem.
The two sides hate marriage almost as much as they hate each other. Now, one of these influencers is a woman named Pearl Davis, who has garnered a relatively large following on YouTube and various social media platforms. She's in her mid-20s, single and childless, and yet full of opinions about modern marriage and family life, a subject that she has no personal insight into whatsoever. She spent the past few days on the internet complaining about quote-unquote tradcons like myself, who she says promote the nuclear family despite not understanding what it's really like. Yes, we men who actually have wives and children don't know what it's like to be married, but a woman who is not married and has no children does know what it's like.
This is absolutely ridiculous. So he comes and he paints all red pillars with this broad brush, and then what he does is he takes a woman, and puts her as the representative face of the red pillars and says she's single and childless, has no idea about how marriage works, yet he's doing a video that's calling the red pill view on marriage just as toxic as feminism, yet he didn't even decide to look for any red pill men on the internet. There's plenty of them with huge channels. Why not take the red pill view from the men and present that as the red pill view instead of going straight to Pearl Davis of all people? It's disingenuous.
In one of her tweets, she wrote, quote, "The tradcons push marriage because they aren't old enough to know better. They don't know the reality of what they're pushing." This is accompanied by a picture of myself, Ben Shapiro, and Michael Knowles. We aren't old enough to know better and don't know the reality of what we're pushing, yet a woman who is younger than us and single does know better and does understand this reality.
You know who knows better? Guys like Better Bachelor, Joker, Coach Greg Adams, John from It's Complicated channel. All these folks, Rich Cooper, I can name a ton of them. Those guys know better than you because he knows what it's like to be married, but he doesn't know what it's like to be divorced and have your kids taken from you. I worked at a child support agency for 5 years. I saw thousands and thousands of divorce orders come across my desk. I read them all. Thick, expensive divorce orders, thin, easy divorce orders, and I saw who was getting screwed there. I talked to the people. I met them, the moms and the dads, coming to talk with me, the state, now meddling in their lives. Matt Walsh hasn't had that happen to him yet. But you know who that has happened to? Steven Crowder. Here's a clip from Steven Crowder. Let's watch this.
By the way, I think that states should have the right to regulate same-sex marriage. You know why? Because states have different divorce laws.
State issue.
Oh, it's no-fault divorce, which, by the way, means that in many of these states, if a woman cheats on you, she leaves, she takes half. So it's not no fault. It's the fault of the man.
I was about to say.
And that's why, look, you can argue till you're blue in the face. Even the women who separate yourself from feminists, well, she is entitled to 40%. 40% of young men don't want to get married.
Thins out the herd a little bit.
What do you want?
So Steven Crowder, who's basically one of these guys, the tradcons, advocated for it forever, is now suddenly talking about how the laws are unfair. Why? Because he probably knew his marriage was on the rocks at that point, or maybe it was over already. Now there's articles about him advocating for the pushback to at-fault marriage in Texas, because now his wife left him. All these kinds of things. Suddenly his wife leaves him, and all of a sudden he's closer to the red pill than he's ever been in his life. Here's Pearl Davis an hour ago. So this is the response. This is her response to Matt Walsh's video, which pretty much calls her out. Matt Walsh blog made a video at me, and the comments are taking my side. Matt, why don't you just debate me on this since you have so much to say? Let's look at the comments. We got one here. It says, you can agree with and support the idea of traditional marriage and still see the current problems with the institution of marriage, like egregiously unfair divorce laws. I'm sorry, but I don't agree with you here, Matt. I'm anti-marriage, but the main reason is simply for how screwed up the divorce process is. Marriage used to be what Matt wants it to be. Marriage is a retirement plan for women who can leave at any time and take half because of feelings. Get rid of no-fault divorce and more men would get married. So we can see this war heating up. It was only a matter of time because the beliefs of both camps are fundamentally different on the issue that really matters here, which is how do young men conduct themselves in this new world? The tradcons are basically saying, just do it like you've always done. Put your head in the sand. Something's wrong, but take the chance. Oh, it failed? Oh, well, you just didn't find the right woman. You guys weren't religious enough. And that's how they explain that away. The red pillars are saying, listen, you got to get smart. You got to get logical about this. Maybe it's not a good idea to sign the paperwork. Maybe we got to start looking at these laws and get these changed. And the tradcons are intimidated by that.
You may be surprised to learn that marriages fail at a rate of 75%. The figure that people like this normally use is 50%. And the claim that 50% of marriages end in divorce is already spurious, and we'll have more on that in a moment, but 75%? I was wondering where that number came from, so I scrolled down and I saw something that she reposted from an alleged lawyer who said this, quote, it's not 50-50, that only accounts for divorces. Another 25% on the negative side for miserable men trapped in cheaper to keep her marriages, unwilling to risk financial destruction and loss of their children. 75% chance of a devastatingly bad outcome is just a bad plan. No sane person would enter into a commercial contract on such terms. Now, I did ask him where he got this 75% figure from, and he wouldn't say. Apparently, the magic statistic fairy came and whispered it in his ear.
He's saying he doesn't know where the 50% marriage statistic came from, apparently where the 75% marriage statistic came from. And he's trying to say that it's a spurious claim that the statistics that reveal that the rate of divorce is 50% is wrong. But let's take a look at this Forbes Advisor article here. This is August of 2023. Okay, and it's talking about the total amount of divorces. It runs us through some stats. It asks, how many marriages end in divorce? So what about the famous statistic that half of all marriages end in divorce? That's true, but only when it comes to first marriages, half of which are dissolved. Second and third marriages actually fail at a far higher rate. Let's see what the rate for second and third marriages are. In fact, 67% of second marriages end and 73% of third marriages are dissolved. He's claiming that the 50% statistic isn't true, but it looks like it is true, honestly. So he's going to have to do a better job of debunking that.
Now let's take another example. Car accidents. Americans get into car accidents at a certain rate. I'm not sure what the rate is. It doesn't matter for our purposes. What does matter is that your own individual chance of getting into a car accident is not the same as every other driver on the road. The people who compile statistics will say things like, motorists have an X% chance of getting into a collision. But you are not just a generic motorist. You are an individual. Now, you can never bring your own chance of dying in a fiery car wreck down to zero. But if you're a responsible driver, then obviously your chances of getting into an accident are much lower than the chances of someone who is not responsible.
He's using this metaphor of driving a car and the statistical likelihood of getting into an accident and how if you're driving really responsibly, it's not going to happen. But what the red pillars are saying is that there's supposed to be a guy in the driver's seat, and then there's the woman in the passenger seat, and they're fighting over the wheel while they're on the road. And it's leading to them being in accidents that they don't want to be in. You know, they can't figure out who the driver's supposed to be because women are like, no, we want to drive now. You know, or we don't even want to be in this car. We want to be in another car. So he's sitting here and he's trying to explain these statistics away with these examples that aren't even one for one with what we're talking about. All right, let's see what Matt Walsh's solutions to the problem are.
But you can do everything on your end, and maybe your spouse doesn't do the same, and then it falls apart anyway, and that happens, and it's terrible, but it happens.
And that's what the red pillars are saying. That's the problem. I'm glad he's admitting that.
It's also true that there are many, many things you can do in your marriage and before your marriage to make it much more secure than the average. Obvious things. Like you can marry someone who shares your same fundamental values. Not everyone does that. In fact, a lot of people don't. A lot of people go into marriages knowing ahead of time that they're marrying someone who doesn't share their fundamental values.
You know, it basically goes into vetting. You know, someone who wants to live traditionally, or they profess that they want to live traditionally. I know so many people, plenty of religious people. I mean, you know, a Christian guy or something, like a buddy of mine, he finds a Christian woman and then it ends in divorce. You know what I mean? Steven Crowder's dealing with this right now. People share values for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, even 20 years, and then it ends in divorce. We know that half of first marriages end in divorce in over varying lengths of time here. They probably had the same values, but then it all crashed. And when it crashed, the person who got the short end of the stick is typically the provider financially in the marriage, which statistically happens to be the guys.
Their chances of divorce are going to be somewhere much higher than yours if you don't make that basic entry-level mistake that they have made. You can do other things. Like you can state from the outset that you both in principle don't believe in divorce and won't consider it as a viable option for solving any marital difficulties you may experience down the line. You can have a strong and shared faith. You can establish from the beginning a habit of honest communication. You can make time for each other.
These solutions he's giving is just so bad. It's all based off just hope. And many men have done that and then ended up getting shafted. These aren't real solutions.
You can continue to date, even or especially as your lives get busier and you start having kids and so on. You can make a strong effort to be patient with and grateful to each other. You can take care of your body and your appearance. You can do all these things and more. Now, I'm not saying that if you do all of this, it will bring your divorce chance down to zero. I'm not denying that there are plenty of people out there who did all this, at least on their own end, and yet still ended up divorced. That's not my point. My point is that the divorce rate doesn't take any of that into account. The people who take none of these basic steps are lumped in with the people who do all of it, and we're supposed to believe that both groups have an equal chance of marital failure. That's just not true.
Why doesn't he suggest another solution? Why won't he suggest people get married but not get the marriage certificate, not get the marriage license? You know, like, why wasn't that one of his solutions? Why doesn't he give us his opinion on that as a solution? The reason is because he can't. You know, if you're associated with the church in this country, which, you know, many of the tradcons are, they are, you can't get the marriage license. Your marriage will not be recognized as legitimate from the church. So in this one issue, marriage, you have the church and you have the state linked together, at least for the Christians. This leads to a problem because he can't suggest that as a solution that, like, listen, as long as you believe in the bond between a man and woman before the eyes of God and do all the same stuff a married couple will do, and you don't trust the state, that's fine. We rail against big government all the time. We were mad at them, you know, with the virus that was here, the pandemic. We were mad at them for all these other things, you know, that they get mad at. However, when it comes to this, there's no opposition to what the government wants. And it's because they can't suggest that as a solution. So it's important for you as a red pillar to understand what the divide is between the tradcons and the red pillars. Anyways, this is getting exciting. I can't wait to see how this war develops, and I will be watching it closely and reporting from the ground. This is going to be fundamental, I believe, in how our culture develops. Because right now we have a problem that people have been ignoring for a long time, and the problem's getting so big that people can't ignore it any longer. Thousands and thousands of young men who are frustrated, they're lonely, they can't figure it out, they can't find these, wonderful white picket fence marriages that Matt Walsh is talking about, and it's presenting an issue. Matt Walsh's solution is to take the blue pill and just go back and trust in the system and how the way things were. Even though he's not admitting that the system has fundamentally changed with marriage and the institution of marriage, and he's not fighting to get that changed. Instead, he chooses to shame you. He chooses to shame the red pillars. The tradcons fundamentally they see the red pillars and they're like, that's a large voting bloc. We need them. We want them on our side. So what they're trying to do essentially is hijack the mgtow guys, hijack the manosphere, the red pillars, and they're trying to get them under the tradcon umbrella. In order to do this, they got to oust the old guard. You know what I mean? The people who preach against marriage, and they're trying to redefine the red pill as essentially just the blue pill, but with, a different look to it, in order to get you guys back in line, to feed back into the system. Matt Walsh, Candace Owens, Jordan Peterson, and the rest of them aren't presenting a solution for men. They're not advocating for men's rights. What they're doing is they're just focusing on shaming other people, shaming men for not getting married, shaming women for being promiscuous or whatever it is. But none of that helps with fixing marriage, fixing relationships. What they should be doing is looking at the laws and saying, hey, we got to look at how marriage, spousal support and child support works across the nation. We got to be looking at how paternity laws work across the nation. Let's start talking about that. Let's ask the hard questions about that. No, they're not doing that. They're taking the easy way out, which is shaming you, shaming the women, which are really just acting in a system that allows them to act like that. Can you blame them? It's just what it is. Of course, they're going to take advantage of where they can take advantage of. Being mad at them doesn't solve anything. Anyways, thanks for watching. Hit that like button, and we'll see you on the next one. Hit that subscribe button.